Hello, my name is Tolg. I exist, therefore I think too much. Um, I was going to generally rant, and I've been doing that instead of reading Marguerite Porret due to the holidays. Um, this isn't necessarily pointed, but I have so few things that I have experience in, so I may as well rant about something I do have experience in. I was scrolling, and maybe I'm not the only one going through holiday mourning because there's been an increase in people talking about abuse, whether that be stories that they're reading or the abuse that they went through. And a note that I have made several times now through my own experiences in life is that being made a victim of abuse is not a generic way of being. There isn't, I guess if you're an abuser, you can identify victims, so I've been told. But, I don't think generally that each one is just going to be understood by looking at them, that it's stereotypically what it is. Having said that, you have a lot of instances where people have the ability to come out with what it is that they've gone through only when there are receipts kept of it. There are fewer incidents where people without receipts are believed, and that alludes to the type of abuse you've suffered as well as the type of victim you became. One of the things that I went through, I don't always have the ability to freely talk about things, but was religious abuse. And I didn't necessarily get to a point where I felt comfortable outwardly saying it to anyone because, I'm 32 years old, but gosh, I don't even remember when it would have happened. I think I would have been 15. Anywhere from 15 to 17, so 2009 to 2011, I think. Since that time, I've just generally been ashamed. And I thought, the other party was absolutely in the right to have been upset with me. So, without receipts, the type of victim I had constantly chosen to be is what is commonly termed Stockholm Syndrome, where I protect my abuser so that I don't get it worse. And when it regards the church, it's from, roughly 15 to 17. And I can't say the church, but they called themselves the church. It had gone from a situation that was seemingly reasonable. There was a megachurch that we were going to, non-denominational, and it had decided to split with those that wanted to stay with the building and those in the congregation that wanted to follow this specific pastor that had decided to dip into the tithing and use it for personal reasons. And I think the majority of the congregation didn't even know why he was leaving the church. They just enjoyed how he did his pastoring. And he was very vivid with how he would command the stage. The celebration of fire from heaven, commanding fire in the church, demanding that God show himself to the congregation. if anybody wants to come to the front type of things. So I can understand why people would like the theatrics of it. So anyways, from there, my mother had followed suit of someone that at the time I believe she trusted. And this trusted individual left to go to a church that was in a strip mall. I'm not really sure how they came across this church. I do remember that specific pastor would brag about, going on airplanes and discussing that he was an exorcist, technically speaking, because of the deliverances. And he gave this whole sermon one time about how a deliverance is equivalent to an exorcism. They just don't call it that. And he's not technically wrong. Well, no, technically he's wrong, but they're aiming for the same thing, I guess. Technically, an exorcism is run by the Catholic Church. And it's in regard to having gone through education related to demonology. And it aims to expel entities from the physical human, and there are different types of exorcisms based on the level by which the human is plagued by these other entities, and so there is terminology in relation to that. I can't remember the most surface term for it, but I do remember that there is oppression versus possession, and that the Catholic Church had come out and said that it is incredibly rare for possession to actually take place. Most people are just oppressed, where in visual regards, that means like especially where non-denomination decided to understand it, like a demon will sit on your shoulder essentially and plague you, or claw into your back was another visual that was applied to it. And possession is literally situating itself into your physicality and replacing you as a person, probably keeping you in a stasis somewhere, and acting through your body. So this church in the strip mall, that's what the pastor would congratulate himself on participating in. And nothing major happened there. It was all right, just a smaller church. I don't have many memories of it. I learned the game Spoons. I think it's a card game, but there was a bunch of diving across the table. So it was fine. And then from there, we followed this same trusted individual. Oh, right. They couldn't pay the taxes for the space or something, and so that church dissolved. And so the trusted individual said, well, kind of tired of shopping around, so why don't we all just meet up at each other's houses? And they lived across the street from my mom. So they were our neighbors and her trusted friends. And, they would say, if I had a daughter, I would have wanted her to be like you, type of thing. So it just added into the amount of trust there was. At times they would say things against legitimate family members that they knew better than me about the gifts that I was receiving from them, that the gifts had demons attached, so I could not receive the demons lest I be plagued, or the gifts lest I be plagued by the demons, furthering the distance between me and those family members. And eventually it didn't, go to other people's houses so often, so we all just met primarily in the neighbor's house across the street. And it was a group of, let's see if I had to put a number on it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 12 on a weird day, but 10 adults, and, children would filter in and out. And there were Bible studies based on sometimes videos. There was worship that they put together, but I would go through deliverances where, and I can't even count how many happened. These adults, again, I'm 15 to 17, so the youngest adult in the room was late 20s, early 30s, the oldest being 50-something. They would all gather together, and part of non-denomination is being spirit-led, so if one person is hearing from God, it is ethical that they run it by other people to check if what they're hearing from God is shared by the other individuals. But that does not take into account groupthink, cult of personalities, and what do they call that? Group hallucinations? Shared delusion? Something like that. So one person would write in a notebook the name of the demon or the thing that's plaguing and run it by someone else, and the someone else would be like, yep. So I would sit down as a group of adults stood in front of me and listed off demons. In the name of Jesus, we call out the demon of lies or lust or greed, general things, but it could also be more specific to a situation or a thing. And it would be expected that I would essentially disassociate and move my being over to platform a demon and let this demon speak through me to respond to the questions they're asking. And if I did not do this, then I was not well connected enough to God. I was not good enough, trying hard enough to have a relationship. And if I did comply, obviously it means there must be a demon. So they would press for very personal questions in relation to a virgin's sex life. And I would have to tell them. And that happened multiple times. No receipts, because this is what is normal. So there are different ways to deal with abuse. And unless you make yourself raw, if you don't have receipts, if you learn to be strong from what happened to you, you will not be believed. If I live out my emotions for every situation that happened to me, then I suddenly become pathetic enough to be left alone, to be treated with an ounce of respect. The only time that a victim can be strong is if they had a community prior to the abuse who would stand by them after the abuse, or they had enough evidence. And in order to have evidence for the abuse that you're going through, you need to be manipulative. You need to allow the abuse to continue. You need to set your abuser up into a position to have what they're doing be understood by others. You have to have it be seen, whether that be recorded or be in the presence of someone else, at which point you're putting yourself in a position of power, which I have struggled with. Wouldn't you be able to, personally, not pressing anyone else in theirs, but wouldn't you be able to run away with that same power? And it's been 1 week since you looked at me. It's been like 10 to 12 years since a specific situation happened in my life. And as much as I can try to distance myself, as much as certain communities understood what happened, there's a price to be paid for not taking the abuser's side. Because they're in a position where they're willing to do so much, and everybody can see that. And the other side doesn't have power. So what do others stand to lose? How much do they stand to lose? And what is being offered? And then taking into consideration reputation as well. How much do they stand to gain if they don't know anything and jump in on it as though they do? Because all of the people that hold sway are saying this. So like I said, it's been 10 to 12 years, and without a community behind me, and with a complete lack of evidence, and even being raw. If I don't come out and say exactly what happened all the time, because I can say it once and I'll be left alone for maybe a week, which means I have to say it once a week in order to be left alone for an extended amount of time. The other party stands to lose more if I am to be believed, which is part of Stockholm. Keep your abuser safe to stay safe. Because to the extent that the abuse has happened, I have had to decide that only certain people can be in my life. They have to be able to go through it. They have to be able to see me go through it. They cannot be connected in any which way, shape, or form. And when a cost happens, they need to be able to afford it. And that's very few people in relation to what happened. So, you know. Yep. I guess that all of that to say the general rant conclusion would be a perfect victim never exists. Part of being abused is that you learn the patterns of the abuser. You learn how to abuse. And that's that saying of hurt people hurt people. I've run into several people who say, well, I've been through so much. The rest of that is kind of fill in for the subjective situation. Who's going to hold me? You know, I deserve this. Whatever it ends up being. But if you don't learn the tools of your abuser, if you don't become the type of wrong that people can feel comfortable with, All you are is a perpetual sacrifice. At which point, you're a burden, and there's no proof to help you. So, there's just the leftovers of the survival mechanisms you learned. Unless you are manipulative. And then what becomes of your person? What can you say you stand by? What is morality other than subjective? What makes a good person in a situation where you have to become just as bad in order to be perceived as okay enough to be left alone?